Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Welcome back to the new year. Here we are kicking off season 2. Dr. Taylor here with my coffee in the dark hours of the morning, recording for you today. Welcome to season 2. We made it. We did 42 episodes last year. That's a lot of grief talk. And I feel so honored that I got to hold space for such amazing conversations and introduce you to some great clinicians and grief workers, all in effort to help with normalizing talking about grief, both death and non-death losses. And this year, I hope will be no different. The goal is weekly episodes. January was a little bit of a rough start, which is why we're posting near the end of January. I'm having grace for myself in how I ran out of steam at the end of the year. And that gets to be okay. Decembers can be rough. I used to jokingly call them dark December because as you know, my anniversary is November. And that emotional hangover dark December was on par for the course. And that actually leads really great into talking about January and this new year, because it's hard to feel optimistic and positive and refreshed for the new year with this fresh start coming off of a dark December. It can feel like you're slowly crawling out of that couch burrito cocoon of all the holiday snacks and the slow pace and everyone feeling more unplugged over that 2-week holiday window. And so it can feel hard to get the engine started for January or feel like you have to take off, like the light just changed green starting January 1. And I think we get to do that differently as grievers. And how do we work on reframing for ourselves what we think January should represent versus what it actually does represent, in that, okay, January, it's just the calendar turning a page. It's another week. It's just the year's a little different. And how do I set intentions for myself? Intentions being something that doesn't have an end point. Intentions are wanting to show kindness to myself this year in a way maybe I didn't last year. Intention in letting my grief take up more space. I struggle with the whole resolutions and goals because it has an end point. And while, yes, goals can be helpful in the short term, they can be helpful in a lot of different areas. I think with grief and goals don't really go together. So thinking through what makes the most sense for my new year and really being intentional with how I spend my spoons, my metaphorical emotional spoons. So let's talk about it. 15 years ago, I had my first January after a loss. It was the new year. And in that season of life, I was still training for a marathon. I don't know if I've shared that on here, actually. After my brother passed, I was like, okay, I need to move. Movement has always been a really big part of my life. I was a competitive athlete growing up. I played basketball for 12 years. I ran cross country to get in shape for basketball season and had always really loved running. And so for me, my intention was more movement starting in January. It was a dark December and I was like, okay, I'm going to run a marathon because that's what made sense in my grief brain is I'm going to do that. And so I was working at Barnes & Noble at the time. So I went to the running section in Barnes & Noble in University Village in Seattle and looked for some running guides and some structure, because the last time I'd done consistent running, I'd been in high school. I ran on the treadmill through college, but I wasn't running like with a plan or an intention or working towards something. And so I found a running guide book at Barnes & Noble and just started doing that to help with my mental health, because I think I felt so stuck in where I was at and I wanted to do something different to find my way through my grief, because I was just in so much pain. And so I could zone out and almost take a break from my grief when I was running. I would have really loud music because I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. So I couldn't just run in silence. I admire the people that can do that and are just good with their thoughts and their own motivation propelling them forward. But I needed loud, angry music to help me run because I was angry. I was in pain. It was hard watching my family hurt, going through that first holiday season without Garrett. And yeah, that was something I chose for me. That's definitely not something I would recommend for everyone. And I ended up busting my knee out when I hit the 12-mile mark. So I didn't actually get to run the marathon, which is fine and a different kind of grief for a different conversation. Today, we're focusing on New Year stuff. I think there can be really mixed feelings about starting the new year when we're grieving. There's the loss of, oh, this is a year where my person isn't physically here anymore. And that just, that hits in your gut. There's the grief that, I'm maybe not bringing in the new year with them when maybe I have in the past. This means another year where they're not going to be at the holidays. And if it's the end or near the end of that first year of loss, it's like the reality that, oh, this is my new normal. This is what future years are going to feel like. That can feel really hard. Maybe you're retiring this coming year, or you're going to move to a different area, maybe some of those non-death losses. So there's this sense of impending grief that, ooh, life's really going to change. So how do I stay present and engaged without getting swept up in what could happen in the future? New Year's are complicated. And then there's this pressure to make big changes to ourselves or how we live. And I think that societal pressure to be productive or to change something about yourself versus resting, versus making a slow start, versus finding ways to have compassion for who we are, versus working towards loving who we are and understanding who we are in this new normal. So not necessarily getting swept up in that pressure to change, to be different, to do different, to produce, but more just like, wait, there was a lot of change in this past year, and I'm still working to catch up with that. What would it be like if my Januaries, I just make it a transition month, or February or March? Like, you could take the whole next year to make it a transition. You get to make the rules for how you do your life. With January, it doesn't have to be like a launch sequence where suddenly we're in this go-go mode. It can be, how do I breathe in this new year? Using the metaphor of the deep sea diving, it's okay, maybe I was in a really dark December and I was down at the bottom of the ocean, and now I've got to figure out how to come up for air. Maybe I want to do that slowly. Maybe I want to slowly acclimate back up to the surface so that I don't just get the bends, or I am so disoriented or overwhelmed or too much shock that I'm trying to do something too quick, and moving slowly and with intention, figuring out what feels good for me now in this new space. Whew, we made it through the holidays, folks. And that was maybe more social expectations or masking than you'd had to do in a while, or people asked a lot about your loss, and so you had to talk about it more, or felt a pressure to talk about it more. Maybe you didn't socialize at all and you're like, okay, maybe I do want to socialize now. I think January isn't the only starting gate. It's just a societal starting gate. And with grief, you get to set the pace and the markers for what makes the most sense for you. Because again, grief isn't linear. It doesn't follow a calendar. And even though January can sometimes intensify those feelings of isolation or reflection or being on a different path post loss, I hear that a lot, where I was on this path and then my loss hit, and it's almost like I jumped to this parallel track that's different, and everyone else is still moving on this one path around me, and I'm like, I hopped on the slow train and I'm trying to acclimate to what this new world looks like in this grief state, and I'm not ready to move forward. I'm not ready to get back on, what are they, like the airport, the flat escalators that go through so that you can get to your terminal faster. I'm not ready to hop on the moving platform yet. And that gets to be okay. And if you are feeling stuck in your grief, that's okay. We're not working towards gold stars. We're not working towards a grade. And it can feel uncomfortable figuring out how to carry your grief into the new year. So you get to choose what feels best for you. So let's talk about some strategies for that. there are alternatives to the January resolutions. We don't have to have goals around our grief. There isn't an endpoint with grief, so we don't need to set goals around it. Creating a grief, quote unquote, grief intention for the new year. So maybe once a month, being really intentional with your grief and finding a small way to honor your person, whether that's lighting a candle on a special day or journaling a reflection or picking a photo each month to rotate out from a spot that you see, because you want to be thinking about that memory with your person that month. It could also be having a walk with someone who also experienced the loss of that same person, and you want to intentionally make space to talk about your person. I think that can be a really great intention too, so that you're carrying them with you through the year. It's not that I've closed the door, they're back in 2024 and now we're in 2025 and we're not going to talk about them anymore. It's no, like, I want to be intentional with how I carry them with me into this new year. I think mindfulness tools can be really helpful. And something I use often is acceptance and commitment therapy. That framework I find really helpful because it's all about accepting where you're at. And so, like with anxiety, with grief, it's a part of us. It's not like we can just cut that part of us out or off. How do I learn how to sit in that space, sit with it, and learn how to breathe through it rather than feeling like I'm fighting against it or not wanting to allow it to be part of me when it is. And so we're working to accept ourselves as our whole selves. So I think having a mindfulness exercise like leaves on a stream, where we're just watching our grief thoughts pass by and placing them on leaves on a stream, and we're just watching the water float by. We're not trying to change it or control it or manipulate it, rush through it. We're just learning how to sit and notice the grief thoughts as they come and go. Another cool idea could be crafting a grief calendar for the year ahead to mark significant dates. So birthdays, anniversaries, if you would have had traditional days planned with someone or trips planned, and then being intentional maybe with your work calendar around those days. So maybe around birthdays or anniversaries, I'm going to take some extra time off if I have PTO. I am going to not plan anything for the weekend before or the weekend after because I don't know how my body's going to be in that space. And so I want to budget in time for meaningful grief work, things like that, to just allow space for the emotions, for the grief waves, because we don't know how they're going to show up in this new year. So I think that can be a helpful tool with setting intentions for this coming year and trying to make those care plans for ourselves. I think that can be really important. And just in thinking about clients I'm working with and have worked with in the past, January can be such a tricky month. Some of them want to increase their therapy sessions to really get a handle on their grief and understanding themselves in this new year. There can also be I'm going to stop therapy for a bit because I want to take a break. I just need to orient and reacclimate to this new year, to these changes, to the pace of everyone around me. And I just need some space to wrap my head around that. Some start journaling practices because I want to remember things as they come up. And so if I get in that practice or habit of journaling, or maybe I didn't have the capacity for it last year, but I have it this year, I want to lean into that. Maybe they want to go on a grief retreat or plan a trip and bring some of their person's ashes with them to spread because they would have enjoyed that. So I think January can be a cool month to think through, how do you want to set yourself up to care for yourself in your grief this coming year. And that's going to look different for each person for different losses. I think another important piece to remember is expectations. We can feel that societal pressure to really just go gung ho in January. And I think reframing our expectations for us, especially if this is your first new year after a loss, how do I dial that back a bit so that I am setting myself up to be successful in honoring my grief, in going at a pace that makes the most sense for me? You don't have to go hard. You can go soft. You can lean into rest. You can let your grief take up the space that it needs, and reframe your expectations for yourself. Again, we're not working for gold stars. We're not working towards a goal, an end date, because our grief isn't going to end. It's just going to shift and morph as we learn to carry it. Big takeaway for this little quick chat is the new year doesn't require a new you. I'm going to say that again. The new year does not require a new you. You're still you with your loss, with your person or people that you're carrying with you into this new year. And you get to honor your grief, and however that shows up, you get to be intentional with how you want to take care of yourself in this space. And it's okay if you go slow and go soft and embrace rest where everyone else seems to be rushing around you. Thank you guys for tuning in, for joining for season 2. We're going to keep talking about these sticky, tricky, uncomfy parts of life, and how do we continue to bring our grief into our new normals and integrate it into our day-to-day and normalize talking about it. I look forward to these conversations with you in this coming year, and encourage you to be kind to yourselves today, and we'll chat more next time. Take care. That's it for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If this conversation resonated with you, or you think it might benefit someone else, please share it. Sharing can open doors to healing, understanding, and normalizing these griefy conversations. If you're craving deeper insights or ongoing support, consider signing up for the Grief Gap newsletter. It's packed with resources, tips, and personal stories to help you navigate your grief journey. Visit the website www.griefisthenewnormal.com to subscribe. For those who prefer a more personal touch to their healing process, check out my grief journal, Authentically Unapologetic. It's designed to help you explore your grief on your own terms, with prompts and exercises that encourage reflection and growth. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and I look forward to our next meaningful conversation. Our soothing tunes are provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in sharing your story, collaborating, or learning more, please email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. You can also stream the episodes on YouTube for more engaging content. Until next time, keep exploring your grief with intention and support, remembering you don't have to do this alone.